Good morning. Welcome to your early warning briefing for Friday, the 21st of February, 2025. I'm your host, Mark Nielsen. I am joined today by Robert, Jared. Mike will be with us later on during the roundtable, and that will be at 10 Central Time as per usual. So let's jump inside the Beltway. Robert, looks like Donald Trump is finalizing plans to cut the Department of Education. What's going on there?
Good morning, Mark. Yeah, so a White House official said that President Donald Trump could sign an executive order as soon as the end of this month that will direct the Department of Education to wind down functions using existing executive authorities. And apparently, this order is also expected to direct the Department of Education to analyze current laws that would allow the Trump administration to basically move its functions to other agencies and actually close the department.
All right. And Rob, go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, so the Federal Trade Commission is also looking to probe social media censorship. This is from FTC Chair Andrew Ferguson. He said that the FTC is going to begin a public comment period on what he called big tech censorship on technology platforms. And what I thought was interesting about this is that the FTC's request for public comments actually defines technology platforms pretty broadly. It includes not just different types of social media platforms, but also internal and external communications at tech companies and other internet services. And then finally, the Senate voted at 52 to 48 to bring a budget reconciliation bill to the Senate floor. And this is basically the budget reconciliation process is where the Senate can pass a bill without a supermajority. It ignores the Senate legislative filibuster because it uses the budget reconciliation process rather than passing a normal bill. And in this case, the Senate bill is going to be in two parts. And this first part increases defense spending by $150 billion and immigration and border spending by $175 billion. And the House is also looking at passing a budget reconciliation bill, but I think there's kind of a fight between the two chambers over how the shape these bills are going to take. I think in the House they want to pass one bill, and the Senate want to pass two, and I think it has to do with the political realities in both chambers of what can actually be passed quickly.
All right, and Robert, finally, to round things out, looks like we have talked a lot about these USAID or USAID spending cuts. And the Trump administration has been taking a really, looking at these under a microscope, but there has been some blowback. So we did have a couple judges that were freezing some of those actions against USAID and other measures that the Trump administration was taking to kind of be able to trim down the federal workforce. What's going on, though, in terms of the latest with the DOJ? Could you fill us in?
Well, this is actually the second federal district judge that has said the Trump administration is not complying with their order to stop the spending freeze. And this is Washington, D.C. District Court Judge Amir Ali. He said the Trump administration is not complying with his order to unfreeze U.S. Agency for International Development spending. But he actually declined to hold the Trump administration in contempt of court at the request of the plaintiffs, these nonprofits that are suing over the USAID funding. And the Department of Justice actually told the court, interestingly, that the Trump administration was in compliance and that the order was actually very broad and allowed the Trump administration to, what they said, enforce their rights on these USAID contracts, which includes terminating them. So in this case, what I think is happening is the Trump administration's broader strategy in this Trump resistance lawfare is malicious compliance, basically. I think the Trump administration is pushing the boundaries with these lower federal courts in a bid to continue Trump's agenda without openly defying the courts in public. Because what they're doing is they're moving quickly to take control of federal agencies and payment systems. And I think that combined with a very tight control over information about the administration's activities is actually hindering the effectiveness of some of these, Trump resistance lawfare efforts. In this case, I think the Trump DOJ is also starting to go on the offensive in some of these lawsuits. I think they actually asked the federal courts in one of the lawsuits over this federal funding freeze to impose a cash bond on the nonprofits that are suing over the spending freeze in case that the lower courts are overturned as these move through the court system.
Yeah, Robert, I think that your analysis there with the strategy is key here. The Trump administration has been working hand in hand with OMB, Office of Management Budget. Russ Vought is over there. And so many of the things that we were discussing prior to Trump being elected, in terms of all the media fanfare over Project 2025, I mean, really the linchpin in all this is OMB. And it looks like the Trump administration is really aligning DOJ, OMB, and then the White House. And through these measures, the tight control over information, I mean, this is a marked difference from what we saw during the first term. Do you see, Robert, though, in the future, do you see these resistance efforts kind of wising up and changing their tactics? Or are they still, on their heels with this?
Well, I think for right now, it's kind of the Trump resistance lawfare stuff is being disrupted by this combination of malicious compliance and basically very tight OPSEC on what the Trump administration is actually doing. And I think at the end, this is going to go to the Supreme Court, and it's kind of an open question of which, where the Supreme Court's going to go. And, as we've said before, some statements from like Clarence Thomas, I think, point to, the Trump administration could win out on this. Even if it's only on the Supreme Court's, the Supreme Court's motive is only to maintain the power of the courts by kind of tamping down on these national level injunctions from the lower courts.
All right, thank you, Robert. Finally, to finish off our Inside the Beltway, we have no major hearings in either chamber of Congress that we'll be monitoring, but any developments that come up, you can be sure that we'll be reporting on that and providing some analysis. All right, gents, let's move on to our roll-up items for the day. Robert, could you please take us through yours?
Yeah, Canada-based fertilizer maker Nutrien CEO Chancay said that tariff costs and impacts on Canadian imports of fertilizer are going to be passed on to U.S. farmers. But he said this impact is going to depend on the timing of the tariffs on Canadian imports. And he said U.S. farmers are likely to feel the impact of tariffs after the spring planting season this year. Texas state legislature is also debated a bill called SB 21 yesterday, and this would create a Texas cryptocurrency strategic reserve. Interestingly, I found a list of 28 other states that have proposed bills that would either establish their own cryptocurrency reserves or allow the state government to invest state funds, like state pension funds, in cryptocurrencies. And then finally, yesterday, Customs and Border Patrol Chief Mike Banks said that unlawful encounters at the southern border are down 94% compared to to this time last year. He said that the drop in border encounters is due to Trump administration executive orders that have done things like allowing for summary deportations. That's the expedited deportations that go around the immigration courts, and then also canceling Biden policies that allowed immigrants to enter the U.S. with government permission, like the CBP-1 app. And then also he said that troop deployments to the border and deputizing the National Guard and allowing them to enforce immigration laws also disincentivizing a lot of illegal immigration coming over the border.
All right, thanks, Robert. Let's move over now to you, Jared, for our global roll-up items. What's going on?
Absolutely. So the Southcom commander, the Southern Command commander, just wrapped up a meeting with quite a few Panamanian officials to discuss regional security and the U.S.-Panama security partnership. At that time, he also secured additional agreements for cybersecurity and supply chain security with the Panama Canal Authority. Canada announced yesterday that it would be following America's lead, designating numerous cartels as terrorists for almost all of the same cartels that we did. And Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko issued a statement warning Russia that America is trying to drive a wedge between Russia and China. He also warned that the Ukraine peace deal would harm Belarus due to the sanctions on them and a renewed Western business presence, which could outcompete local businesses.
All right, thanks, Jared. All right, now for the warning items for the day. Robert, let's pull you back up here. The president has issued another executive order blocking federal funding for illegal immigration, or illegal immigrants, rather. What's going on over there?
So this is an EO that was issued this week, and basically Trump is directing federal agencies to identify all federal programs that provide financial benefits to illegal immigrants and take action to end these programs. And according to this order, the Trump administration also said it's going to ensure that federal funding to state and local governments is not going to be used to support sanctuary policies or assist illegal immigration. And I think what's going on here is that the Trump administration is going to use these blocks on local and state governments using federal funds for sanctuary policies in tandem with civil suits and possibly even criminal cases from the Justice Department Sanctuary City Working Group that they set up earlier this year to basically force sanctuary cities and states to cooperate with immigration enforcement. And I think it's also possible that the Trump administration is trying to use both this Sanctuary City Working Group and this EO to incentivize illegal immigrants to self-deport, by impacting state and local benefit programs that provide benefits to illegal immigrants. I think there was also another action the Trump administration took this week. They're ending the temporary protected status for Haitian immigrants. And the temporary protected status was something the Biden administration put in place to protect illegal immigrants from being deported. And I think this is a couple of these, eliminating these TPS actions is also another thing that the Trump administration is trying to do to basically disincentivize illegal immigration and also, push some of them to self-deport.
And Robert, we talked a lot about how this could be a galvanizing force for the Trump resistance. We've seen a little bit of that, but in terms of cutting off these funds to illegal immigrants, and then already the Trump administration has been targeting a lot of this NGO complex that kind of facilitates these actions of supporting illegal immigrants here in the United States. I mean, do you see any roadblocks along the way when it comes to these funds? Have you seen any? I know that there have been responses from various Democratic officials and congressmen, but I mean, do you really see any kind of resistance to this forming that seems to have any teeth? Or is this just like what we discussed earlier? Trump administration is kind of 2 steps ahead.
Well, I think right now the Trump resistance strategy is really heavily reliant on lawfare, on using the lower federal courts to put temporary restraining orders or eventually possibly injunctions against the Trump administration taking these actions. But this kind of thing where blocking funding to the states over certain political questions is not unprecedented. The federal government has done this pretty extensively in the past. It was most famously on the federal government to get states to increase the drinking age from 18 to 21 across the board. They threatened to cut off transportation funding. So I think this is I think they're going to have a hard time finding a judge who is going to step in and say that the Trump administration can't withhold funding over these types of political questions to the states.
Okay, thanks, Robert. And that kind of leads us into our next warning item. The resistance that we've seen to Trump, at least officially, has been some of these lower courts. There have been a lot of forum shopping and trying to stop Trump's efforts this way. But it looks like the Department of Justice has just come out and made a statement on this effort by the Trump administration to resolve this problem of these lower court judges stalling his agenda. What's going on there?
Well, in this case, this is actually the administrative law judges. So administrative law judges, I think we talked about this last year when we started to see a lot of these lawsuits against like the Securities and Exchange Commission. These administrative law judges, they're basically internal judges to some of these independent agencies, federal agencies. And the DOJ said yesterday that what they called multi-layered protections for that block the president from removing these administrative law judges are actually unconstitutional, and they're no longer going to defend these protections in court. And they actually cited a 2010 Supreme Court decision that said that the president, under Article 2 powers, does have the power to remove officers, federal officers. In this case, they are saying that these administrative law judges are effectively federal officers. And in the DOJ statement, they also said that the unelected and constitutionally unaccountable administrative law judges have exercised immense power for far too long, and that the Trump administration is restoring constitutional accountability. I think that's an important part of what's going on here, largely with the Trump administration. There are a lot of these moves we're talking about, firing federal employees, reining in these independent agencies, is the Trump administration is part of the Trump administration's stated goal of, reinforcing the president's Article 2 powers and bringing the executive branch under direct control of the White House. And I think in this case specifically, they're setting the stage to clear out these administrative law courts, which importantly includes the Department of Justice immigration courts. I think we talked about it earlier this week. He'd fired the latest class of the DOJ immigration judges, and I think he's going to move to clear out the entire immigration court and replace them with judges that are not going to hinder his immigration agenda.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Let's now shift over to Jared. Jared, could you take us through your warning items?
Absolutely. So the Chancay port down in Peru recently opened about 3 months ago, and the Chinese are reporting that in the first 3 months there was almost $300 million worth of goods transferred across that port. The goods were largely machinery heading into Peru and agricultural products heading into China. Now, Chinese state media reports that the port is actually cutting shipping time down to just 23 days from Latin America to China, and this is saving them about 20% on shipping costs. The one Chinese provincial official even claimed to have imported 2,600 tons of silver concentrates from other Latin American states that were using Chancay, and that they intend to increase their access to Latin American mineral markets. Now, this increased port activity at reduced costs, I think, will make Chancay more strategically important for China's agricultural and mineral sectors, thus incentivizing them to establish at least a police presence in there. It's fairly common for them to have a minor police presence, but it could also incentivize them to move onto a proper military presence just to secure the port, especially if we see any kind of degradation between the United States and China's relationship.
Jared, can I just pause you just for one moment, just to kind of provide a little bit of perspective for those who are not familiar? I know we've reported on Chancay before, but this is a kind of a key node within the Belt and Road Initiative. It's located in Peru, has a lot of this Latin American trade that goes to China, really comes out through Chancay. But like we've talked about in the Panama Canal situation, is we have a large Chinese state-owned enterprise that's basically running Chancay here. And so, just for those who might be unfamiliar with this, this is going to be another one of those key places that attracts attention, not only from, its local partners in the area, the Peruvian government, but also the United States as we look at Western Hemisphere, right? And so for those who might not be familiar with Chancay, this is a very important port within Latin America. It comes out of Peru. And what we've discussed many times with the Panama Canal, for example, of Chinese influence in the region and how they're able to flex that out because of their access to that port, Chancay is exactly that. But sorry to pause you there, Jared. Go on ahead. I just wanted to provide just a little bit of additional perspective on this.
Yeah, absolutely. You actually had a note in the report today of that there is a bit of a contestation between Costco, the Chinese state-owned enterprise, and the government of Peru on who exactly owns the port, with Costco claiming exclusive ownership rights and Peru saying no. So we will continue to monitor that, and that may be a pressure point that the Trump administration uses to drive Costco out of Chancay, because they can't just take the infrastructure with them. Then, staying on the note of China, so the trio of Chinese ships that we reported on earlier this week conducted live fire drills 340 nautical miles off the coast of Sydney, Australia, causing Australian pilots to make sudden diversions in their flight routes while they were heading to New Zealand. On the map here, I've got the flight routes. The dotted lines are where they were supposed to be flying, and the solid lines are where they ended up actually flying to try to avoid the live fire drills, with the little red circle there being where the surface action group was actually conducting the live fire exercise. Australian Defence Minister Marles claims that China gave no warning to the Australian or New Zealander governments, but broadcast on a shorter range radio that would be picked up by the commercial airlines, hence their sudden diversion, that they would be immediately conducting live fire drills. Now, as far as why does this matter? Well, this is a highly unprofessional show of force directly under a flight path. China's attempting to intimidate and provoke Australia into action after threatening one of their maritime patrol aircraft with flares last week, and now conducting dangerous maneuvers near civilian aircraft.
And Rob, Jared, we were talking a bit about this before the show. Many of us, I was in the Army. I don't really, some of this is a little hard for me to wrap my head around, given I was a ground pounder type. But this, as we do know, Australia is a major player in the United States pivot over to focusing on Asia. On top of that, the Australian government, we cooperate a lot with the Australians. I know our intelligence community, for example, has very deep ties in with Australia as a member of the Five Eyes. We do a lot of coordination and intelligence sharing. My big question for you, though, is so this is a very unprofessional and frankly dangerous move by China. This seems to be a lot different than what we've seen in the Philippines, and we've seen with China bullying fishermen and its neighbors. I mean, would you say that that's fair characterization, that this is kind of out of the norm?
Well, so conducting a live fire exercise immediately under a flight path, especially with little to no warning, can be exceptionally dangerous depending on how high the ceiling is. They didn't have any published ceilings. Hey, this is how high we expect our munitions to go. These are all missile capable vessels. So without warning, hey, this is what we will be firing. Technically, that ceiling could be, into near space, crossing the flight path. That does show a brazen just disregard for safety there. From what I can gather, it doesn't seem like they did fire any missiles, but you still have to declare that. That is part of normal procedure for this. What makes this particularly different is that anytime you see the run-ins between the Chinese and even the Australians, the Japanese, the Filipinos up near China, it is all in contested territory. This is not. This is out in international waters under a relatively low traffic area, but right in an air traffic path between the three largest cities in the region: Sydney, Christchurch, and I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on what the southern New Zealand city was, but three of the largest airports there. So unless they just were not monitoring their air search radars, there is no reason they should have been conducting this here without just trying to outright intimidate. Now, as far as why, I'm trying to wrap my head around that one as well. I'll be giving that a lot more thought. This just happened like this morning. Australia is a core member of the anti-China coalition that is built. So it could be that they're trying to peel that off, but that is trying to strike at basically the heart of the anti-China coalition in the Pacific, not trying to peel off the periphery states like Vietnam or Malaysia. That this is an odd move for China. It frankly is just bizarre.
Thanks, Jared. Yeah, definitely. We'll be monitoring this. I think that is significant. All right, that does it for today's warning items. We do have some pretty good questions here in the chat. We're a little short on time. Might be able to just address one or two, but then we'll have to move the rest to the roundtable. We did have a question regarding this situation with Chancay. Bad Wabbit asks, what would be the time? What would be the time frame to change the port over from commercial to militarized? I don't know, Jared, feel free to step in, or Robert, if you have any perspective. I will add just here is that one of the interesting things, the way that China does this with the Belt and Road Initiative, as many of you know, the Chinese government is able to maintain significant PLA presence in with its state-owned enterprises. And that doesn't always necessarily mean like boots on the ground, rifles in hand. When they have this kind of influence at these ports and these other parts of the world and their projects, which they do in Africa, South America, there is a high likelihood that China is conducting surveillance, that they're gathering intelligence, that they have other aspects of their militarized activity that they are conducting in many of these places. And so, we have talked about the possibility that there could be a militarized force there as well. But there's also another dimension to this. And when it comes to a time frame, I know the question is probably pertaining to like boots on the ground, militarizing a port. But just to keep in mind that in the background, there is always going to be this PLA presence that tends to have a more shadowy function. Jared, do you have any thoughts on that? If you don't, obviously, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but.
Yes. So first off, I need to double check that Chancay is actually military capable. I know there are ports in the region that are close enough to just secure Chancay, kind of territorially, without having to actually be in Chancay proper. But as far as how long does it take from okay, we're gonna do it to we're doing it? I mean, 23 days. That's the shipping. That's the shipping time now. Is about 3 weeks to get presents from there to there. I don't think it's going to happen in the next 23 days because they need to establish a reason to do so. And it is very, very difficult to justify an overseas presence like that without, a significant strategic issue there. Like if we would probably need to be in a near war scenario in order for that to be justified. That's why I think that the much more likely scenario is that they establish a small police presence and say, hey, we're here just to make sure that the Chinese civilian presence is, still properly secured. But that would not allow them to fight a navy if they have the police presence there.
Excellent. Thank you, Jared. Last question related. The rest, again, we'll try to address during the roundtable. Bad Wabbit also asks again, what is the population of China and Peru currently, and do you expect that to increase? I think this is an important question because the population in Peru of Chinese, either of Chinese nationals or those of Chinese descent, which I do think is significant because that tends to be an avenue which the Chinese government pursues with Chinese individuals in the diaspora of working with them. The current population, I think, of Chinese in Peru is somewhere around 1 million, around there. I think it's difficult to be able to track that, but I have seen claims that up to 5% of Peru's population could be of Chinese or of Chinese extraction. Now, this is significant because in South America, I think the running number of maybe Chinese, of that Chinese community in countries like Peru, Brazil, Venezuela, which is where they have the largest presence, is only about 1.5 million. And so we're looking at Peru having a significant number of Chinese there. And as I mentioned, I think that is significant because typically the Chinese diaspora works very closely with the Chinese government abroad. We've seen this in Africa. We see this in South America as well. So Peru is one of those places to watch, and Chancay is really kind of ground zero of that influence. Major node in the Belt and Road Initiative. And so this will be something that we'll need to continue to watch. I'm curious to see how the Trump administration kind of continues to try to muscle China out of the Western Hemisphere. I think that what we saw with in the Panama Canal is a good example of maybe what is to come here in the near future. So Chancay will be one of those that we'll have to monitor and see what the reaction will be. All right, Robert, Jared, thank you so much for all the input. That does it for today's report. You can expect the report in your inbox later today, as per usual. We will also be back here at 10 Central Time for today's roundtable. So those of you who have posed some excellent questions this week, but we haven't got to them, we will address those during the show. Then I will not be on the roundtable today, but Mike Shelby will be running that. Again, thank you so much for tuning in, for all your support. If this is your first time checking out Early Warning, please go to earlywarningnetwork.com to get additional materials over on the high side, and you can subscribe over there. Well, as always, thank you for your support and for tuning in, and stay out front.